Hello and welcome back to AfricaThe Africa. 2020 was really a rough year. One way or another everyone has been affected, from restaurants to banks and larger industries. And as the year has drawn to a close, we're beginning to see a sliver of light through the dark tunnel that was 2020. Africa has always been a vibrant continent, brimming with life, culture, and natural resources. It's no wonder some of its countries are part of the world's largest producers of oil, precious stones, and gases. Africa, with 54 countries and over 1.3 billion people, and a nominal GDP, that is, gross domestic product, of over $2.2 trillion, is one of the fastest growing continents. And as the years pass by, it is sure to become a powerhouse, leading in technological growth and economic stability. Let's take a tour of the top 10 richest economies in Africa for the year 2020. But before we get started, make sure to subscribe to this channel by pressing the red subscribe button. We have a lot more great content coming up. And also, like the video, and share it with your friends. Tanzania. Starting this list is the country of Tanzania. With a GDP of $62.22 billion and a developing economy, the country's economic growth has been on a rise these past few years. With a 5.6% growth rate and new government policies, its growth doesn't show any signs of slowing down. Curious, what's the source of this steady rise? Well, with the new recent government prioritizing the expansion of their budget revenue to support the development of its economy, they've largely invested in railway lines running across the country, the revival of a failed state airline, Air Tanzania, and the development of their new hydropower plant. With all these, Tanzania seems to show promise again. Home to over 60 million people, the gap between the rich and those living in poverty still persists, with the majority of Tanzanians spending their incomes on the necessities of life, like food, water, a rent, and transportation, and never even considering spending on other little luxuries is stark. Although the government hasn't been blind to these facts and has subsequently engaged in social policies to get rid of poverty in its borders.
We are supposed to consider the best issue of economic developments. We have no brothers. We have no fathers. We are supposed to move as Africans. Africa should move on their own. They are supposed to change the directions. We are supposed to focus according to our directions, according to our environment. That is the only way.
Plan called Vision 2025 is a comprehensive framework emphasizing 7 priority areas linked to overall poverty reduction, with the country's major exports being agricultural commodities such as tobacco, coffee, cotton, cashew nuts, tea and cloves, and precious metals like gold. The country's economy is largely leaned on these agricultural exports, as it's contributing over 25% to its GDP and 30% to other accounts being mining, electricity, natural gases, and water supply. With exports in Tanzania averaging a whopping $1.3 billion from 2012 to 2020 and reaching an all-time high of $1.7 billion in the fourth quarter of 2019, which was said to be one of its historical heights. Tanzania has been on a growth surge and might soon see it ranking part of the top 5 in the coming years. Ghana, a West African country, also rich in natural resources, has a GDP of $67.077 billion and is a developing lower middle-income economy. The country is known for being one of the first sub-Saharan countries to break free from colonial rule.
That new African is ready to find his own battle and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing all of us.
And is one of the first to achieve the historical landmark of reducing its poverty rates by half, which was one of the most extreme rates less than a decade ago. Gold is one of the country's major exports, as well as oil, cocoa, wood and aluminum. The country has experienced an economic surge with a GDP growth rate of over 6% following 2018 through 2020. However, Ghana's power sector is under much pressure due to high costs of maintenance. In the coming years, it might cause a major standstill in its economic growth if a solution isn't found fast. Not only that, but an election cycle amidst an oil price war and the impact of COVID-19 has also put a dent on its growth this year. The current population is around the range of 31 million people. Although Ghana globally is one of the least developed countries in the world, it's still considered one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. with its exports averaging $808.69 million from 2004 through 2020 and reaching an all-time high of $1,437 million in January 2020. It is ranked number 9 on this list. Located in the Horn of Africa, is the landlocked country of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is famous for being the place the coffee plant originated, Coffea arabica, and coffee culture. It is Africa's highest producer of honey and, you guessed it, coffee. With a GDP of $91.166 billion, Ethiopia's agricultural exports are the country's leading sector, making up 40% of its GDP, and an increasing economic growth averaging 9.9% yearly since 2008 and a very high rise in 2018. What are some of the possible causes? The election of the Ethiopian Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, who launched an ambitious economic reform with intent to drive an economic transformation and in its process, the opening of one of Africa's most closed economies. The plan all began with the privatization of the telecommunication sectors down to banking, and sugar plantations were implemented to boost its economy. With a current population of over 115 million people, Ethiopia had one of the highest rates of poverty in the world back in 2000, but with its recent change in management, the pace at which poverty is reducing in the country has been admirable. It experienced a 33% poverty reduction, which was faster than its African counterparts, and the country had its increasing agricultural growth to thank for that. With exports averaging $643.30 million from 2016 to 2019 and reaching an all-time high of $984.8 million in the first quarter of 2014, it currently ranks number 8 on this list and 63 globally. Angola is a country in southern Africa. It has some of the biggest oil reserves on the African continent, and is the second largest oil producer on the continent. The Angolan economy is largely built on oil. The country has large reserves of natural gas. The oil sector accounts for 1/3 of GDP and 90% of its exports. With a GDP of $91.53 billion, it's number 7 on this list, and ranks number 62 globally. The country is facing massive developmental challenges. Despite all the revenue from the oil, there doesn't seem to be much trickling down. The effect isn't seen in the life of the masses. Like many oil-rich countries, there is always a significant challenge with corruption. And Angola is no different. After the end of the Angolan Civil War in 2002, its government has been working on political and structural reforms to stabilize its economy and also diversify from its oil dependency, which has been carried out by implementing reform programs from both the IMF and World Bank, who have pledged significant amounts to support the Angolan government. With a current population of 33 million people, Angola's GDP has tripled over the last few years but shrunk recently by 1.8% in the first quarter of 2020 due to the fallout of COVID-19. In 2020, the current president of Angola said the country was facing an unprecedented opportunity for change. Perhaps this will bring a new growth for the nation of Angola in the coming years. Kenya has emerged as one of the fastest-growing economies in Africa, with a growing GDP of 5.7% in the year 2019. The East African country is known for its vast landscape, rich wildlife, and a stable economy. With its growing agricultural and booming tourism sector, Kenya is one of Africa's richest. The Kenyan agricultural sector has been deemed as the wealthiest in the Southeast and Central Africa, with a GDP of $99.25 billion. A current population of a little over 54 million. Kenya is still confronting a large gap between the rich and poor, some of who are living in a state of extreme poverty, such as the famous Kibera slums. Kenya's GDP expanded a total of 1.1% in the first quarter of 2020, but later on in the year was affected a bit by COVID-19. The famous Kenyan tourism industry also took a hit in 2020. Its major exports are tea, coffee, horticultural products, and oil products. Kenya ranks 61 globally and sits comfortably at number 6 on this list. Morocco, a country located in the northwestern region of Africa, is facing a surprising growth in its economy. There has been an increase in foreign investment over the last decade. Morocco is Africa's second richest, non-oil producing country. It is number 5 on the list. The agricultural sector employs about 40% of Morocco's workforce. And being the largest producer of phosphorus in Africa, and third in the world, it's been a tourist attraction and an investor hotspot. The country is deriving 30% from its industrial sector, 15% from its agricultural sector, and the other 55% from services, resulting in a GDP of $119.04 billion. Despite the general economic growth, there was a stunt in growth in getting to the end of 2019, with its GDP growth of 2.7% and missing the World Bank's estimate of 2.9%. The reason? Mainly internal problems, like corruption and power struggles. The country's inability to deal with these problems lead to it missing its economic target. Then, to add impact of the worldwide economic downturn that hit every country in the world, Morocco's GDP plummeted 14.9% in the second quarter of 2020. This was the first and sharpest contraction in its record, owing majorly to the 2020 economic shock. With a current population of 37 million, the country is focusing on fixing uneven development among Morocco's regions. Algeria, a North African country, is the continent's largest, boasting with a significantly large economy and outstanding infrastructure. The country ranks at 4th on this listing, 53rd worldwide, with a GDP of $172.781 billion. One of the country's notable achievements was reducing poverty as far as 20% over the course of 2 decades. With its economy leaning heavily on its oil production and discovery of crude oil reserves, it is one of Africa's fastest-growing economy. Although having other revenues, it's not only reliant on oil, as its agricultural sector, industrial works, and commercial services are also doing well. However, with the recent depression and instability in oil prices, the country has seen a recent decline in its currency reserves. Also, political uncertainty and scandals in the hydrocarbon industry have caused a dip in Algeria's economic growth. At number 3 is Egypt, an ancient land in North Africa that was once at the pinnacle of wealth for many years and could have been at the top again if not for the 2011 Arab uprising that shook its economy and foreign investors. However, its economy has since then made a comeback and is experiencing economic growth with the aid of reforms programs from the IMF. Its GDP growth rate skyrocketed in recent years, with 5.9% growth in 2019 and 5.3% the year before. Egypt is slowly rising to the top again, but the other countries won't give up without a fight. With a GDP of $302.26 billion, the Egyptian economy is well diversified, having various sectors from which it receives revenue, such as its petroleum and gas exports, tourism, construction, and real estate. However, despite its current standing, Egypt might face some issues in the coming years. With a large percentage of people still living below the poverty line, a high unemployment rate, and a weak healthcare system, the country is bound to face some stagnation after 2020's global crisis. It ranks number 34 globally. South Africa, situated in the southernmost part of the African continent. It is the closest African country to Antarctica. In terms of its economy, it is the most diversified country in Africa. The country's GDP is supported largely by mining, manufacturing, financial services, and tourism. The country is one of the world's largest exporters of gold and platinum, and the infrastructure in the country is on par with any of the leading nations in the world, such as America, China or England. With its highly developed economy, its current GDP is set at $358.839 billion. Although the country has great potential, political and internal squabbles have hindered its growth. Having faced negative growth rates in 2 consecutive quarters of 2019, its GDP grew by only a 0.2% in 2019, and took a further hit throughout 2020 to the global crisis. The country's major focus now is making sure there are equal opportunities for all of its population of over 58 million, as the gap between the rich and poor has increased in subsequent years, and the unemployment rate has increased to 27.1%. If the country can solve its political issues, it is certain to become the #1 economy in Africa. And finally, for #1 on the list, Nigeria, known for its vibrant cultural heritage, diverse ethnicities, natural splendor, and the largest populated country on the African continent, Nigeria is #1 on the list for top 10 richest economies for the year 2020. Blessed with natural resources like petrol, oil, cocoa beans, and natural gases, it's Africa's largest producer of oil, producing over 1.6 million barrels a day and making up 80% of its export revenue. Its oil reserves are the backbone of this country's economic growth, raising its GDP to $446.54 billion. Between the years 2000 and 2014, Nigeria grew its GDP year-on-year by 7% and had become one of the fastest rates in Africa. However, growth has since slowed to around 2% due to oil and production shocks, corruption, and political instability within its region. For many Nigerians, the quality of life has declined rather than improved since independence 40 years ago. With ever-increasing unemployment rates and high level of illiteracy, the country's #1 status is far clear of its living standards. Despite the fact that Nigeria has the highest GDP, in terms of infrastructural development it is as lacking compared to the previous 4 countries. And despite its enormous resources and potential, the country has not been able to make use of its large reserves to aid development and create better living conditions for its people. It recently surpassed India as the nation with the most people living in extreme poverty. According to estimates, there are about 86.9 million people living in severe poverty, out of the country's 200 million population. The government is working to try to create a better living for the masses, and they need to do it fast, as the country's population is projected to grow by another 200 million by 2050. That's it for top 10 biggest economies in Africa. You are watching AfricaThe, showing the Africa they never show you. Make sure to press the like button, share the video with someone and educate them, and leave us a comment below on what you'd like to find out next. And if you haven't subscribed, press the red subscribe button, and turn on the notifications on so you don't miss any new videos. It's free. See you next time.